On the campaign trail, President Trump promised to cut America's electricity and energy prices in half. New data, however, shows prices are actually rising more than twice as fast as inflation. And analysts say there are a few things really driving up the costs here.
You know it's true. You don't realize how important electricity is until you don't have it.
But it doesn't stop there. That in and of itself doesn't make us an energy superpower. We can be an energy superpower, and we have all the components in nuclear, in hydro, in potentially in carbon capture and storage.
Hey, welcome back to the channel. Something strange is happening across America, and almost nobody saw it coming. People are opening their power bills, and they're higher than ever. But here's the twist. This isn't just inflation, or bad weather, or some grid failure. According to analysts, the real reason might be buried deep inside Washington's own trade policies. Since 2020, electricity prices have surged more than 30%, with another 30% jump just since 2021. Nearly 80 million Americans are now behind on their utility payments, forced to make impossible choices between keeping the lights on and buying groceries. And in early 2025, power companies filed for $20 billion in rate hikes, setting off a wave of anger across the country. Factories are feeling it too. Higher energy costs mean higher prices for everything from steel to semiconductors. Economists are calling it a man-made energy storm, a crisis that didn't start in nature, but in policy. So what really happened? How did a trade war meant to protect American jobs end up burning through household budgets instead? Before we dive in, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content matters. Now, if the first part felt shocking, here's where the puzzle pieces start to connect. The surge in electricity bills isn't just a random outcome, it's the ripple effect of a much bigger economic experiment that began with one promise: to protect American industry. But instead of shielding the system, those same tariffs may be quietly crippling it from within. Under the revived Trump-era trade measures, tariffs were slapped on imported energy equipment, metals, and key components, the very materials that keep America's power grid running. The result? Input costs have skyrocketed across every link of the energy chain. Roughly 80% of U.S. transformers are imported, and now they're caught under higher tariffs, creating nationwide shortages and construction delays. Power purchase agreements, the backbone of wind and solar development, have already risen about 4% in cost since the passage of the OBBB Act, a small number that translates to billions in lost investment. Across the country, renewable energy projects have stalled, forcing utilities to fall back on expensive fossil fuels just to keep up with demand. The irony is hard to ignore. A policy designed to strengthen domestic production is now inflating costs, weakening innovation, and pushing the entire energy sector into a self-made cost spiral. And that raises the question, when protection turns into pressure, who really pays the price? If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. It's how we keep uncovering what others won't say. While the U.S. grid wrestles with higher costs and mounting instability just across the northern border, the picture looks remarkably different. Canada has managed to sidestep the chaos, powered by a foundation few countries can match: abundant hydroelectric and nuclear energy. As American utilities scramble to cover rising costs, Canada has quietly become the steadying force behind the continent's power balance. In 2024 alone, the country exported more than 11,381 gigawatt of electricity to the United States, helping to stabilize regional grids stretched thin by domestic shortages. Provinces like Ontario and Quebec enjoy significant surpluses of low-cost generation, thanks to their massive hydro and nuclear capacity. Two major cross-border projects, the Champlain Hudson Power Express, 1,250 MWh, and the New England Clean Energy Connect, 1,200 MWh, are expanding the flow of clean electricity from Quebec into the northeastern U.S., providing both reliability and a crucial emissions buffer. Today, Canadian electricity lights up homes for roughly 1.5 million Americans, primarily in New York, Michigan, and Minnesota. For those regions, Canada isn't just a neighbor. It's an anchor of stability in a grid increasingly defined by volatility. In moments when the U.S. system strains under its own weight, Canadian energy doesn't just fill the gap. It represents something deeper, a reminder that in an interconnected continent, Reliability itself can be a form of power. But even stability has its limits. As trade tensions between Washington and Ottawa deepened, Canada began to send a quiet, yet unmistakable signal. Electricity could become more than just an export. It could become leverage. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford floated the idea of adding a 25% surcharge on electricity exported to the United States, a move that would effectively raise import costs by about $10 per megawatt hour, or roughly $400,000 a day for American buyers. Around the same time, officials in Quebec hinted that even long-term power contracts, such as those supplying Vermont, might be renegotiated if U.S. tariffs continued to squeeze Canadian industries. The tone shifted further when Hydro-Quebec CEO Michael Sabia put it bluntly, "The U.S. needs us more than we need them." It wasn't just a statement. It was a warning wrapped in economic logic. For the first time, energy itself was being discussed as a bargaining chip in the Canada-U.S. relationship. And in a partnership that has long been built on trust and open exchange, that subtle shift marked something new, a moment where cooperation gave way to quiet calculation. The idea of cutting the power across the border might sound like a political gesture, but in reality, it's something far more fragile and far more dangerous. The North American electric grid isn't two separate systems stitched together. It's a single synchronized organism. Any disruption, intentional or not, ripples through both sides almost instantly. According to the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NECEC, restricting cross-border electricity flows could trigger serious operational problems in both countries. The New England region, for instance, imports only about 5% of its annual electricity from Canada, but that number jumps to 15% during peak winter months when demand and heating costs soar. Even a modest tariff, say 10% on cross-border electricity, could push retail prices higher across the U.S. Northeast and Midwest, compounding the strain already caused by rising generation costs. And if supply is suddenly reduced, engineers warn the grid could lose balance, leading to local blackouts or cascading outages that would be difficult to contain. What began as an economic standoff could therefore evolve into something systemic, a continental grid crisis. Because when politics seeps into the wires that literally bind two nations together, the consequences don't stop at the border. Canada's clean power advantage gives it a rare kind of leverage, one most nations would envy. But that same leverage comes with a question Ottawa can't easily ignore. How far can a country go in using energy as a bargaining tool without damaging its reputation as a stable, reliable partner? On paper, Canada's electricity exports make up only 0.3% of total U.S. consumption. Yet in practice, that small share plays an outsized role in keeping the North American grid balanced, especially during high demand periods. It's a form of influence rooted not in dominance, but in dependability. However, the cycle of tariffs and countermeasures has introduced something new, geopolitical risk, into a market that once prided itself on technical cooperation. If Ottawa were to weaponize energy in retaliation, flagship projects like NECEC or CHPE could stall, cutting off billions in potential cross-border investment and undermining years of environmental progress. Yes, such a move might strengthen Canada's negotiating position in the short term, but it could also erode one of its most valuable assets, the global perception of Canada as a trustworthy, predictable energy partner. For Ottawa, the dilemma is clear yet delicate: how to defend national interests without unraveling the fragile order that keeps the continent's energy system running. Amid America's energy turmoil, Canada finds itself standing at a crossroads, not of crisis, but of opportunity. For the first time in decades, the country holds a decisive advantage: clean, reliable power in an increasingly unstable world. Yet in this new era, every energy decision is no longer just economic, it's geopolitical. Hydroelectric and nuclear power have allowed Canada to maintain stable domestic energy prices even as global markets fluctuate. While others scramble to adapt, Canada's low-carbon backbone offers both insulation and influence. The growing network of cross-border projects, from Quebec to New York, from Ontario to Michigan, isn't just about selling electrons. It's about building trust, resilience, and quiet power. Ottawa's emerging blueprint for a new North American energy security envisions Canada as the continent's steady core, a clean energy hub linking the Atlantic to the Pacific and the Arctic to the U.S. Midwest. If handled wisely, it could transform the nation into something akin to the Norway of North America, a global model for responsible, stable energy leadership. But the flip side remains. If energy becomes a weapon instead of a bridge, Canada risks turning its greatest strength into a double-edged sword, one that could wound its own economy and credibility. In a world where power is both literal and political, balance may prove to be Canada's most strategic asset of all. So the question is, can Canada use its energy advantage to lead without crossing the line into confrontation? Can stability itself become the country's greatest export? Thanks for watching. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click fuels the truth.